Universal Center for Renovation, Historical Israelites. Definitions of Sephardic Jew. Noun: a Jew who is of Spanish or Portuguese or North African descent. The first documented Portuguese to live in colonial America was Matthias de Sousa, a Sephardic Jew. Matthias de Sousa. Matthias de Sousa was the first black Marylander of African and Portuguese descent. He was one of 9 indentured servants brought to Maryland by Jesuit missionaries and was on the ark when Lord Baltimore's expedition arrived in the St. Mary's River in 1634. His indentured finished by 1638, and he became a mariner and fur trader. In 1641, he commanded a trading voyage north to the Susquehannock Indians, and in 1642 sailed as master of a ketch belonging to the provincial secretary John Luger. De Sousa departed and returned to this river many times. He anchored near here and walked to Luger's manor house at St. John's. While living there, he served in the 1642 Legislative Assembly of Freemen. No record remains of de Sousa's activity after 1642, but his legacy of courage and success is regarded with great pride by all the citizens of St. Mary's County and Maryland. Historical marker dedicated October 12, 1987. De Sousa's pendant appears to be an astrolabe. An astrolabe, an ancient astronomical instrument that was a handheld model of the universe. Its various functions also make it an elaborate inclometer and an analog calculation device capable of working out several kinds of problems in astronomy. Historically used by astronomers, it is able to measure the altitude above the horizon of a celestial body, day or night. It can be used to identify stars or planets, to determine local latitude given local time, and vice versa, to survey or to triangulate. It was used in classical antiquity, the Islamic Golden Age, the European Middle Ages, and the Age of Discovery for all these purposes. A brass astrolabe inscribed in Hebrew. The existence of such instruments attests to their use by Judaic navigators. Nautical instruments, such as the astrolabe and the quadrant, used in conjunction with astronomical tables, made reliable overseas voyages feasible. The early instruments, astronomical tables, as well as the first maps of a global world, were largely the products of Judaic savants. A page from the astronomical tables of Abraham Zacuto. The tables used in conjunction with the astrolabe, quadrant, and maps made ocean spanning navigation feasible. The development of such navigational tools are integral to the rich Judaic contribution to astronomical and navigational science. Jewish Encyclopedia, Maryland. Maryland, one of the 13 original states of the American Union. The history of the Jews in Maryland may be divided into three periods. Record is found of one Matthias de Sousa as early as 1639.
Board member says it is precisely because Cape Verde is off the Jewish radar screen and lacks the natural constituencies of Jewish restoration efforts, so common in Eastern and Central Europe, that it merits our attention and support.
It's a wonderful idea, I said to myself, because we know so much about the Jews of Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe. Many of us in this room are descended from those communities. We know a lot about the Jews of Morocco and North Africa. Some of us in this room are descended from that community. But we know very little about the history of this remarkable community. Sitting, as it was, right there in the ocean off the coast of Africa, and yet, which was the home to a thriving and quite interesting Jewish community.
Preservation of memory is a critical part of the Jewish psyche. And in a world where anti-Semitism is ever present, it is inspiring to work on such a positive chapter in Jewish history, one which exemplifies tolerance and respect among Catholics, Muslims, and Jews.
Now, for Carol, what sounded in the beginning like a labor of love has turned into a real important historical odyssey, with all of the important components: the restoration of cemeteries, the marking of places where people lived, worked, archival information, interviews with descendants. There's going to be, when this is done at the end, there's going to be a magnificent history here in all of its parts, in all of its components. It's not just going to be, let's go restore a cemetery. There will be that, and there will be much more, and Carol will tell you more about it, and you can read about it in the brochure.
The passage of time, weather, neglect, and urbanization have all taken a toll on the small cemeteries, which are in varying degrees of dilapidation. We need your financial support to underwrite all phases of the project. There are three major components to the project. Yes, to restore and preserve and maintain these beautiful burial grounds, which are dilapidated through time, weather, benign neglect. There is interest, but hopefully this will be a great catalyst and we can get the job done through raising funds and raising awareness. And of course the documentation phase, which we've been involved in, but we need to really step it up. Interviews, archival, and oral. And again, on my trip in Cape Verde, I was in touch with the university there. There's great interest on the part of the university. with researchers, all levels of government, from the Prime Minister, who has written us a letter of strong support and whom I met on the trip, to Minister of Culture and Minister of Education, who, by the way, is of Jewish descent and is related to Jacinto Ben-Ross, and to the mayors. And they are the ones who are, in a way, responsible for the cemeteries, the municipalities. So we're working with them. We have a good infrastructure in place, but this is why we need your help now.
Cape Verde, 1460, just off the coast of West Africa. The land is empty and uninhabited. Climate is too erratic for crops. And the only other food sources are screeching bats or the bitter meat of helpless turtles. So what would make the Portuguese interested in this uninhabited archipelago? The land was most likely already known to Africans, and even the seafaring Phoenicians, but Europe would first encounter the islands in the mid-1400s. The island groups of Madeira and the Azores were already colonized earlier in the century, under Prince Henry the Navigator. With the addition of Cape Verde, in the 1460s, Portugal would have access to West African gold, bypassing Islamic North Africa. The Portuguese king carved up the islands, and allocated each to a capitães-donatiero, or captain, to settle and develop a system that would be later used in the Brazilian colonies. The first captain allocated land was Antonio de Noli, a Genoese explorer sailing under Portugal's banner, who first took interest in the islands. The location was ideal for Portuguese explorers as well, and used as stops on Vasco da Gama's route to India, and Ferdinand Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe. Cape Verde was initially settled with Portuguese, many from the nearby Azores Islands. In 1496, amidst the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition, Jews on the mainland were expelled, and many headed to Portuguese islands off the coast of Africa, like Cape Verde. They would emerge as foremost traders and adventurers, known as lançados. As for the island production itself, sugarcane was to be the staple, but as mentioned earlier, the island soil and climate weren't very friendly to crops. To get around this, the Portuguese deforested much of the region in order to gain access to better soil. They would then bring in cattle and horses. Eventually, cotton textiles would be a primary trade commodity, exported to the African coast. They would also extract red dye from lichens, called ochre. In return, Portugal would import the gold they were after, but also pepper, ivory, and slaves. They would be the first European power to buy African slaves and transport them across the ocean, kickstarting the Atlantic slave trade in the early 1500s. The Portuguese were too weak to militarily dominate any of the African areas, but there was no need to, as the African trading routes were already supremely efficient, with both the Portuguese and West Africans working together. The arrangements, however, weren't beneficial for the slaves. They would be brought to Cape Verde easily, because of the proximity to the African coast, but have no recourse once they were there, and couldn't escape the island. Many remained as slaves on Cape Verde, producing sugar and cotton, but the majority would be taken to the Americas, mainly Brazil. Over time, less Europeans would settle on Cape Verde because of its relative distance from Portugal, and this led to race mixing on the islands, but the increasing importation of slaves would see them make up the vast majority of the population on Cape Verde's two foremost islands. In 1582 there were just 1,600 white and mixed-race settlers, but there were almost 14,000 slaves. In the late 1500s, King Philip II of Spain took over Portugal, and Cape Verde would then come under threat from Spain's rivals, like England. Francis Drake, the English privateer, would raid settlements on the islands, and the Dutch would attack as well. In the early 1700s, French pirate Jacques Cassard would attack and cause the eventual relocation of the Cape Verdean capital. With trade routes ever shifting, Cape Verde became less important over time, and with the end of the slave trade in 1876, along with the lack of production due to famines and bad weather, Portugal had less need for the island group. In 1975, they would gain independence, but would retain a lot of their Portuguese culture, as many of the inhabitants were mixed race. The volcanic, starved islands of Cape Verde never meant anything to anyone. They were known to Islamic seafarers and ancient cultures, but no interest was truly given to these lonely islands off the coast. In the end, the island's fate was to be the lifeblood, or death knell, of thousands.
First Englishman to sail it. His chance came in 1577, when the Queen entrusted him with a secret mission to raid the Spanish Empire's Pacific coast. On the 13th of December, Drake sailed for the New World with 5 ships and 164 men. En route, Drake's fleet captured several Spanish and Portuguese ships, as well as a Portuguese navigator who knew the South American coast and became their guide. After a rough crossing of the Atlantic in 63 days without sight of land, Drake reached the coast of Brazil.
You say you're from Israel? Okay, I got you on video. That way I can pick out what I want. What part of Israel? What?
know what a moshav is?
Yeah.
From a moshav, not far from Tel Aviv.
Wow. How's everything there?
Excellent. We are here for the year, so.
Oh, okay. You still got the homeland language. All right, thank you so much.
What's up, sir?
That gentleman's from Israel. I had to come down and see it. He says, I saw the website. So, hey.
Hello, everybody. This is Wayne Barbosa. Also, A.K.A. Wayne Edmund Musa Barbosa. Cape Verdean American. Former owner of Cape Verdean.net. President of Parting Ways. And Afro-American Museum of Ethnohistory Incorporated. That's been changed in the last few years. We don't want to do the 501c3. We want to teach. That's all we want to do is teach and reach out and see who's going to dialogue with us because they don't know their history. So sign up, join up, follow, comment, like, share, and I'll talk to you then.
Veterans Affairs. Good work. Barbosa as well. Musa is the Vice President of Parting Ways, and I accept this award not only on behalf of myself, but I accept this award on behalf of the organization that we have been together now for 14 years. Before leaving the podium, State Senator Vinnie DiMacedo said something that was extremely important. And while we are here in this wonderful church, I would just like Senator DiMacedo to know that you have in Plymouth a Plymouth son who is Cape Verdean and one of the oldest veterans living today. That's Judge Layton. Judge Layton lives on Long Pond. Not only does he live on Long Pond, but in terms of his representation of Plymouth, he is one of the greatest chess masters in the world, and he's probably sitting at home right now playing chess on 4 or 5 different computers from Russia all over the country. So Dr. Gomes, who has now left us, who is also Cape Verdean. And if you look at the history of Plymouth, both African Americans, Cape Verdean Americans, all Americans have made a tremendous contribution to our country. And thank you, Senator DiMacedo, for those words about the Cape Verdean culture.
Thank you very much. Now, I'll call on Eric Andrade, special poetry reading.
To be and what to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to resist the present state of mind in which you exist, or simply to persist to be, either way he is me, but who would I rather be, and who would I rather see? You see, fear is the enemy. He pretends he is enemy, telling me what I can and can't do, when in reality that is not true. So stop worrying and go, quench your soul's desire by putting out fear's fire and learning to be what you'll always be, the creator of your own reality.